My guest today is designer Maggie Dillon, who is a master at mixing all kinds of patterns, colors, shapes, scales, eras to make rooms feel vibrant and unexpected and fun, but without overwhelming you. And I think that's a hard mix to get right. So, we're going to take apart some photos of a few of the rooms she's done to help you understand why they work and how she can use lots of formal elements without them feeling stuffy or uncomfortable, and how she pulls off the mix of eras and styles without it jarring the eye. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, which is called, not unsurprisingly, Slow Style Home, you'll see exactly what we're talking about. But we also make sure to describe what we're looking at so that you can still take in the lesson if you're just listening on the podcast. And of course, we'll have these photos on the show notes page on our website. Just go to slowstylehome.com and click on podcast, and you'll see a link to this episode. All right, let's dig in. Here's Maggie. Maggie Dillon, welcome to the Slow Style Home podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here. I found you in last month's issue of House Beautiful, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a really nice treat. It was really exciting to see, but I'm
Yes.
happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You say somewhere on your website that you enjoy pushing people outside of their comfort zones. And I know it's a balance about how far to push, but can you give us some examples of maybe a time when you kind of knew the client was going to love it if they would only be brave enough to pull the trigger?
Yes. I mean, every client, it's a delicate balance, like you've said, but you do kind of remind them, well, you've sought out professional help. You've hired us, you're paying what you're paying for our opinions on this space or on your home. Even if it sounds scary, like a pink room might come into just trust the process. But, there's always the husband that has an opinion on, are you sure we really want butterflies in this room? Or we had one client whose husband really didn't like plaid fabrics, and
Okay.
I use plaids in just about every space I do. It works as a neutral for me. And I had a plaid fabric in each space. And we try and initially in the beginning stages, we try and get, aversions to what colors they have or specific things they don't like, but sometimes they don't know until they've started the process. So he
Right.
really didn't like plaids, and I had a plaid in every space. And I managed to push for a few. I had two plaid sofas in one living room, and we kind of pared it back and put it on the chairs instead, and it worked out great. But
Okay.
it is funny just seeing where people are scared to commit, and I think they
Yes.
just don't know what they don't know. If
Yes,
that makes sense.
yes. And I feel like you really do such a beautiful job about mixing things together, and you really lean into color and pattern, and we're going to get into some specifics in a minute, but are there are there particular, I don't know, colors or trends or patterns that most people are really nervous about, or even come to you and say, yeah, well, I'm never doing X, and then they start seeing it, they start trusting you.
Yes. Well, and I think more than that, it's that they see all of these patterns and colors and textiles on top of each other, so when we're doing a presentation and we have it all laid out for each room, it does look like a lot when you're just looking at it on our studio table, or you're looking
Yeah.
at it in a presentation room and you're seeing all of these little swatches on top of one another. So we kind of talk them through at that point, and we say, well, try and picture as best you can visualize, this fabric is going to be over here. We'll have a solid to break it up, and then we'll have another pattern over here, and then we'll have a smaller scale pattern here. So it doesn't look as in your face as it might in a presentation. And that approach kind of helping them visualize, which, a lot of our clients are not visual people, nor should they be, but kind of that exercise helps a lot with, okay, do we even need to take, these fabric samples into this room and put one at the far corner and one on the windows and one down
Right.
on the rugs and tape one up, just so you can see that things kind of space apart and that it's really not as crazy as it might look.
Right. Well, I think that's such a great thing to keep in mind, because there is so much emphasis on mood boards and on, holding things right up against each other. And if they're going to be right up against each other, that's really helpful. But if, they're 10 feet apart in a big room, it just changes the whole perspective. You started talking about patterns. We're going to talk about that a lot today because I think that's something that people are definitely shy about. But before we do that, I want to come to another thing that you talk about on your website, which is using things people already own. So
Yeah.
incorporating heirloom pieces or hand-me-downs. And a lot of people, they hold on to them because they feel guilty getting rid of them. Or maybe they paid a lot of money for them, but it's no longer their quote unquote style.
The first thing that comes to mind is a client in Charlotte that we just wrapped up. And she came to us with a full first floor that she wanted to do. And in her dining room, she had a set from her grandmother that was a table and a set of chairs. And I usually can get on board with one of the two. I love the sentimental part of that, but a matching set doesn't always do it for me. So she was pretty insistent on wanting to keep it in play. And I think her mom had an opinion, and that was all, family history that you got to respect. So while I wasn't wild about using them together as they were, I came up with the idea of putting this big kind of dramatic, feminine, flouncy skirt on the chairs.
Oh.
So it broke up this heavy wood on wood. There was some juxtaposition with the fabric, and then your eye was drawn not to the table and chairs together, but to the bottom half of the chairs, and it broke up the legginess of the chairs and the table.
Yeah.
So the end result was really special, and they were unique, and she was pleased that we were able to make it work that way. And we'd love to use stuff that's sentimental. I mean, there's no greater value than something that has been passed down for generations, or that was purchased on a special trip, on a honeymoon, or something like that. So reupholstering, lacquering, kind of just bringing new life to those pieces, that will always trump something that I can source, new or old. Even if it's from a different time period than everything else in the house, like it just kind of works because it's special to you, and that's more important than maybe it fitting in perfectly, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I also think it gives the rooms a very human feel, like it's been lived in over time. It's not, we didn't just go out and buy everything all at once.
And sets it apart from somebody else's, or reflects your aesthetic and your design.
Yes. And speaking of aesthetics, particular ones, Bloomsbury. So Bloomsbury, has gone through several different revivals. I love it. They pointed to you as someone who is bringing it back, but in a new way. So for people who may not be aware, what are some of the hallmarks, motifs? What are we going to see a lot of in your rooms that go along with this idea of a Bloomsbury aesthetic? And then we're going to actually look at some of the rooms. So just kind of kick us off here, introduce us to what we're about to see.
I think something that is repeated throughout most of our designs is just it's bold pattern play, mixing colors that might not be traditionally put together. I think the generation before us comes from a lot of matching perfectly. If there's one tone of green, that color green has to be replicated on the bed, on the pillows, on the bench. I think there at one point in time was a rule on how many patterns of different fabrics you wanted to use in a room. And I think kind of what we're bringing in is a new take on that. So yes, there's things to keep in mind, to pay attention to. The scale of the patterns is a big one. The tones of the colors is another one, but there's not as many design rules.
All right. So let's start with this bedroom, and let's talk about the patterns and the colors. There's a lot going on, and it does feel happy, almost riotous, but not at all overwhelming. So just quickly, if you're not looking at the photos, I'll just describe. There's I would say a medium scale pattern on the walls. There's a bed, headboard that is kind of like egg shaped, almost not quite oval. There's almost like a little point at the top. Then there's 1, 2, 3 patterns of pillows. There's 2 little benches in front of the bed that are also different patterns. So can you tell us how you came to these decisions, and how did you know they would work? Or looking at it now, what would have been a mistake to make? Like if someone came to you and said, oh, but I want to put this in, either a color, a pattern, a material, whatever, would you go, yeah, no, that's definitely not going to work?
So let me start by saying that this is my guest bedroom in my house, which
Oh, I love
gives
it.
me a little bit more freedom.
Yes.
And this is my second iteration of it. So we started with the wallpaper. I knew that I wanted to have something a little bit more exciting in there. We have guests as often as we can. So I wanted it to be an exciting space. And as a whole, I feel like with guest bedrooms, you can have a little bit more fun. So we started with that wallpaper. You can't tell from the photo, but there's a navy paint trim in there too. So we've got
Ooh.
that contrast going.
And the
And
wallpaper
then
background is like a, what kind of blue would you say that was?
I would say it's like almost a slate blue. And it's got this kind of, like you said, medium scale floral motif that's repeated pretty tightly.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
then there's a really small scale pattern on the headboard that almost functions as a neutral and solid. So then in front of that, I did put a bunch of different fabrics on the pillows with a solid white coverlet. I gotta say that might be the grounding piece. I do have a solid coverlet and I have a solid bed skirt. The rug itself is not completely plain, but it is a woven jute that has some scallop detail and some texture to it, but it doesn't compete with the rest of the fabric. Those two little stools in front of the bed are also a small scale. And then, or I put these striped bedside tables on either side that are a fabric and leather combination. So the
Ah,
stripe is this linen fabric, and then the brown that you're seeing is a leather. So again, just another texture to kind of throw off all the fabrics, and a little bit more masculine than all of the florals that are going on. And then paired them with an old pair of lamps that I found that have a floral design to bring it back to that. So I wish I could say there was, a real game plan that we followed in here. It's more kind of was just testing the limits on how many patterns I could exactly put in one space without it feeling too crazy. And
yeah.
I think we hit the limit, and I think we did a good job.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
a
I think
small
what you're
bedroom,
saying,
so
there are these large blocks, visual blocks of what read as either solids or neutrals. I would say more solid. So the headboard itself, it reads as a big area of calm. And then,
yes.
like you mentioned, the white bedspread and even the white bed skirt, which I hadn't even thought of. But yeah, that's another big visual block that is without obvious pattern, and then the rug. So you've got these three real, and even the lampshade. I mean, the lampshade is just white.
Yeah.
So I think
Some
that
heavy
that really
hitters.
does go a long way
Mhm.
to making this all work without it feeling crazy. And you brought up something really important, I think, which are the materials. So, you've got the jute on the rug. You've got what looks like maybe wool on the throw blanket. You've got your leather and fabric on your side table, and then the ceramic porcelain of the lamp.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that really, I mean, this is a fun room to stay in. I would want to stay in this room.
You're welcome to come stay anytime.
Yeah, that was a not so veiled invitation when I was inviting myself. All right, let's go to something else that's, I think, a little bit more complicated in terms of making the mix work.
Mhm.
Right. So this is a living room that is got a very bold, beautiful wallpaper that looks kind of like a mural, which I'll have you
Mhm.
describe. Then you've got a plaid couch, which you just mentioned plaid. You've got a sort of a floral print on a chair. You've got a striped love seat. You've got large scalloped edges on the window panel, a little bit of scallop on the ottoman. I mean, there's just a lot going on here. So tell us a little bit about what we're seeing and how you brought all this together. Oh, and let me not forget this humongous mirror that's of a different era than everything else in the room.
It really is. I think it's in its fifth generation of being passed down. It actually had to be cut down on the bottom to fit into the space. And I
Wow.
think these ceilings were around 11 feet. So it's massive, and it had to be anchored into the wall. It is no joke.
Yeah.
And it's this room in this particular house is the only one that fit it. So we knew we had to work it
Oh,
in somewhere.
interesting.
Plus it's gorgeous. I mean, it's a showstopper, but it really can can read more formal if you let it. So
Yeah.
we did start in here with the wallpaper. This is a Kit Kemp wallpaper that's a mural. So it wraps the whole space and has this tall, scenic design with animals and pears, and it's a little bit mythical and just really fun, but not too in your face. The background's more of a mauve blush color, so it's a little bit calming, like you said. And then we have a sisal and wool blend rug. So those kind of two components are our grounding features in the space, if you will. And I knew I wanted to use a lot of patterns on the furniture pieces. And with that,
Mhm.
also knew that we needed to balance that out with a solid on the windows. So there's 3 sets of windows in that room. And I felt like personally, if we did just a plain solid, even with a really pretty decorative tape, that it might fall a little flat with everything else that we'd selected against our
Hmm.
wallpaper, against our fun patterns. So the way I chose to kind of juxtapose that was with this dramatic scalloped edge. And my seamstress, neither of us had done this kind of application before, so I didn't
Hmm.
totally know what it was gonna turn out like, but
Hmm.
we used just a small GIMP tape on the edge to give you that kind of contrast so you can really see the scallop.
Yes.
And it felt like a dressy enough component for the room without bringing in too much formality. So on top of those elements, we paired this solid ottoman. The ottoman we had made from a furniture shop in Atlanta. We put a plaid wool on the sofa. We brought in some smaller scale fabrics on the pillows for that sofa and the lampshade next to it, and then kind of a more punchier striped, that almost a striped floral on that settee, and some swivel chairs. So the client had the mirror, the settee was existing also, so we reupholstered those. And then we got some new production pieces to balance that out. So the side tables are new production. I'm not sure you can tell from this photo, but they have a reeded front.
Oh,
So
cool.
similar to the photo that we were just looking at, it adds another kind of textural element.
Yeah.
And
Now, so there's only one of these mirrors, right?
yes,
So what I think is so cool about this that I feel like keeps it from being overly formal, like you said, along with the mix of shapes, I think, is that it's off to the side. It's almost it's at the one end of a wall. So I don't know. I think if it were in the center, so much of classic design has to do with symmetry. And so you usually have a big grounding piece in the center and then other things on either side of it that match. And I think just by putting it over to the side, it makes it playful.
yeah. I mean, it's a little hard to tell from this photo too, but to the right of the mirror as we're looking at it is the opening to this room. So it's not even something that you're seeing when you first walk in. When
Interesting.
you first walk in, you're seeing that image with the fireplace, and you're seeing all of the different seating options and those kind of playing off of each other. And then we had this on this wall. Quite frankly, there were only probably 2 walls to choose from that it could fit.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this one gave it a little bit more of its time to shine. The other option was in between 2 windows. So this kind
Right.
of gave it its moment. And then we put this old settee in front of it with an updated fabric. And it's kind of a whole moment in this corner over here that the
Yeah.
room doesn't necessarily revolve around, but is unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me look at another photo from this room. So here's the fireplace area. Again, what I'm focused on, at least in this project, are the mix of eras. I mean, you've got kind of like a bit of a chinoiserie wallpaper, I would say. And then you've got these 2 older armchairs that are upholstered in this beautiful, dramatic shade of velvet. Then you've got more modern chairs, you've got custom ottomans, you've got the plaid, which a lot of people would think, oh yeah, that's what you put in a lodge in the woods in the Adirondacks, and here it is in a much more sophisticated space.
Those 2 bergère chairs that you're seeing in that velvet, those were existing. So those
Mhm.
we knew we wanted to work in. And these swivels and the sofa on the right half of the photo are new production. And then we had these ottomans made. So we kind of wanted to use what we had that worked still in the space, but
Yeah.
also add in some more modern pieces.
And I just want to note there are lots of places to sit. And I think that we underestimate the value of creating a space that's specifically for conversation. And that is what this looks like to me.
Yeah. Yeah. We also kind of balanced all of the different seating options with repeating some fabric choices. So
Yeah.
whereas sometimes that doesn't always make sense to do, or it's not the best design decision, in this case, it made sense to, hey, let's have this plaid kind of ground either side. And then let's have these 3 ottomans that can move around. You put a tray on it and you can throw a drink on there, but they also can be seating. And then, put in all these different kind of shapes of seating options.
Yeah, the shapes, right. I love the mix of shapes. And I think, and just in case people didn't catch that, the whole idea of the repeating pattern thing, I think what you're saying is that you are not necessarily going for everything matching. That's not, your bent, but sometimes having a couple of things match in a room with repeating patterns, I think allows you to be a little bit more fluid in other design elements like shape, for example, or color.
Exactly. Yes. You said that better than I could have.
Right, I want to go to one more. This one might be my favorite, although I really love all of them. First of all, describe what we're seeing here and tell us why you think this room works.
So what we are looking at is 4 framed wallpaper panels. It's a Gucci wallpaper that this client was really interested in investing in smart pieces that could travel with her. She's actually since moved from this house. So
Oh,
it was a smart idea. And we didn't want to put wallpaper in here that would just be really hard to leave one day. So
yeah.
instead, we took 4 of these panels, these heron panels, and framed them. We started by using this small scale animal print rug that is a one I love to use when I can in projects because it hides dirt well.
And back to the wallpaper just for a second to describe it. So these are large herons, birds, and they're really the scale of the birds. I mean, they're practically, I don't know how much taller the ceiling is, but the frames, they could practically go down to the floor. And then, I mean, how tall are they? Like 8 feet, would you say?
Yeah. And we had to trim them to fit in this space. So they
Yeah.
were trimmed down to 8 feet and framed, and we wanted them hung so close together that you could see the pattern repeat in
Yeah.
each panel, but then also for them to not look just like an accent wall of wallpaper.
Right. Right.
To function as art too.
Yeah. It looks
So
like it was intended to be hung this way for sure.
yeah, we really hammered in the symmetry in here. So we have 2 floor lamps that ground either side that match. We have 2 matching chairs with matching pillows, 2 matching sofas that face each other. So
Yeah. I have to say, the symmetry works so beautifully in here, I guess because there's so much drama in these wallpaper panels. The symmetry helps the rest of it not really compete with it, but just sort of support it. So I encourage you to look on our website to see photos of all of these. And if you're listening and not watching on YouTube, and to just check out Maggie's work. So she's got more where this came from. Maggie, thank you so much for being on the Slow Style Home podcast.
I can't thank you enough for having me.